Greetings, my friends. David McLeod here, your life mastery coach. Welcome to another episode of Soul Empowerment, where we cover all kinds of interesting topics, ranging from the good, the bad, the ugly, and the in-between. Today, our topic is called All in the Family, and we're going to be talking about the impacts of certain things that happen in our lives, particularly when we're children, and what happens as we grow up and continue growing, becoming adults and going into our lives and so forth. And of course, with me today are my two lovely assistants and co-hosts, Gail Nowak and Sarah Jane. Welcome, both of you. Gail, why don't you do a quick introduction of yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do and who you are.
Sure, I'd love to do that. Thank you, David. So I'm Gail Nowak. I am a transformational speaker and retreat leader and coach. I work with New Earth leaders, helping them really step into their power and their truth and be visible doing it. Yeah, I think that that's probably enough for today. You'll get a sense of a little bit more about who I am and how I roll during our discussion. So I'll pass it over to Sarah.
Before I say anything more, I want to ask you, Gail, what does New Earth mean to you?
So New Earth means to me the creation of humanity and the world in a better system than what we've got going on now. That's what it means to me.
Got it. Well, I guess that's what we're all involved in then. We're all trying to create a better world and try to help people to grow and become even more of who they really are. And you, Sarah Jane, welcome. Say hello and tell us a little bit about where you are, who you are, and what you do.
Hiya. Right, I'm in the UK, down on the south coast, and I work with energy, Reiki, with sound, the sound in the form of toning the voice. I work very much with the inner child, having done masses of work on myself and the traumas of my early years, and having found a way to reconnect with the traumatized child. I've been able to do that for myself, and therefore I help others to do the same. And for me, it is just amazing seeing the difference in people when that connection is made. And the way I like to see it is when the child feels heard and seen. Because for many traumatized children, they don't feel heard and seen. Neither do adults. But I think if we can get back to the child, we can really support the adult. And I know it has made a huge difference in my own life. But you know, people have said to me, but I'm not ready, Sarah. And I think with everything that all of us do, we all have to be ready. And so we totally accept the fact that, yes, we can help people, we can support people. And that's why we do these programs, so that in a way, we can do it in a different way to support people. So yes, that's some of what I do. And before I came on, I'm a natural light at the moment. It's getting dark here. Carry on, David. I'm going to turn a light on.
Okay. Well, and Sarah, what you were saying, you were talking about doing energy work. And I think in reality, that's what we all do, even though we may not use that terminology. I think ultimately, when it comes to healing, what we're helping people to do is, in my view, find those pockets of trapped energy, stuff that's been there for a long time and that may be now having a negative or maybe even a toxic consequence on our bodies and on our systems, and finding a way to release that that doesn't harm anybody. And ultimately, all energy is neutral energy, but when it's in combination with other forms of energies and different kinds of mindsets and all the rest of it, it can be toxic and negative. And the other thing you said, you talked about being ready. This is an interesting concept to me. I know that I've got this mental challenge that I say to myself sometimes, well, I really want to do that, but I'm not ready. or I got to do this and I got to do that and I got to do this because then I'll be ready. But then when I've done all this, that, and the other thing, and I discover, oh, wait a minute, there's one more thing. There's always one more way in which I'm not ready. It doesn't matter, what I do. Sometimes you got to just say, to hell with being ready, it's time to dive in. And that's what I hope that people will learn from the stuff that we do here. We're here now. Don't worry about what's going to happen tomorrow. Let's do it now, because this is the only time we really have. Tomorrow, one of us or both of us or all of us may not even be here anymore. So why don't we just make the most of what we got and do what we can now to improve our lives right now? That's what I like to say about that. Anyway, I guess I do tend to pontificate a little bit, and I apologize for that, but that's part of my nature. Sometimes I have an idea and I shouldn't say can't. I have a difficult time not sharing it. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, it all made perfect sense to me, David.
Good. Well, here we are today, and we're talking about this idea of all in the family. And I know that we've had little snippets of this conversation throughout all of our episodes, I think, but we decided to finally focus full attention on this and talk a little bit about the sorts of things that happen in our lives with, our parents, our grandparents, our brothers and sisters, our aunts and uncles, our siblings, and even our children or our grandchildren, and how those things that happen between us affect us and cause us to behave going forward. So that's really kind of what we're talking about here. And I remember when we first discussed this topic, when the title "All in the Family" came up, I had the picture of Archie Bunker and his wife, and then their son, who they always called Meathead. I don't know if you remember that, but anyway, that was Rob Reiner who played that part, by the way. And anyway, it was a fun, very irreverent, and I think a highly descriptive show about a very dysfunctional family. And I think most people who watched that show could relate to at least one person in the family on one level or another. And that's kind of where our title came from. But the idea is, what happens in our families that causes us, I don't even like to use the word causes us, but that influences us, let's say, to become the people we are today. So that's the conversation, and whoever feels called to start, dive in.
Do you want to go first, Gail, or I will?
Yeah, no, I feel like it's me that kicks this off. So I feel like this is a really big conversation, and it's so interesting that we had our planning meeting a couple weeks ago, and all the things that are showing up in my own awareness ever since this conversation. And literally last night, I was talking about, I was talking to someone in my family about how it's really time for us to be looking very radically honestly about the ways in which we are being in our family, the good and the bad and the ugly, David, as you expressed at the beginning of at the top of the hour here. And I had this moment where it really clicked in for me that if we're not able to really look at that within our own family system, it's going to be really hard for us to tackle the bigger systemic problems that we're having in society, because really we're all one big family. So it feels like a very big conversation, and also a very deeply personal and introspective conversation as well. And so me personally, I'm really kind of dancing in between, your original question of like, what is it about our families that influence us? Like, why do they have such influence in how we be in the world? And also looking outward of like, hey, we really need to be looking very closely at everything within our family dynamic in order to start being radically honest about the bigger systemic challenges that we have right now. So that's kind of like where I'm at the start of our conversation here. I'm not sure if that totally went in the way that you were asking about, but that's I just wanted to presence that.
Right. Thank you. And Sarah, I think you were ready to go too. So what did you want to say about this?
Well, sort of, again, there's stuff going on in my life. I don't think anybody's immune to this unless you are just so closed down to it, or somehow you have got the perfect family. And what is perfection? But no, we've got stuff going on in the family at the moment, between my mother and one of my sisters. And I was actually teaching one of my nieces Reiki level 2 today. So as I said, I very much work with energy, but she's aware of what's going on. And I've also been made aware that she contacted one of her cousins, so another one of my nephews, who is very close to my mother, and who probably gets his ear bent quite a lot by her. That's just saying that we sort of tend to use. And because my niece has been on the receiving end of some of my mum's stuff, she got in touch with him just to say, sort of, it's not just about my youngest sister, who's also her aunt, because it's my middle sister who's her mother. It's just something that happens. And what we were saying, and we were talking about other bits and pieces that have happened sort of like over this weekend and things that have been said. And it's very much a matter of, we've been very much brought up with thinking about other people, what other people might like to do, etc. And we were saying, we're so busy trying to think about and do things for other people and not asking them the question, what would you like to do? And we're assuming we know, but my mother was accusing me of not being sufficient of a mind reader to know what she was after. And I said, well, I'm not a mind reader. You've got to ask.
Exactly.
And it's how people ask. And don't try and make an assumption about me. Please just ask what it is you would like. You may get a no, but you can get a yes. But don't say, oh, because of this, I'm trying to be kind to you. So because it's, forget that stuff. Because, and as my niece sort of said, we can all plan on doing things for other people we think they'd like. None of us enjoy it. And to be perfectly honest, we could have all been doing something else that we could have enjoyed. So our interfering and thinking we understand the people closest to us when we don't, because we have no idea what's going on in their head behind closed doors, etc., etc. All the sayings you can come up with that. It's what people are going through. It is so important that we all talk to each other and stop making assumptions. And I'm deliberately using that word, because assume, as of you and me. And it is so right. Stop assuming, start asking, and ask people to be very concise. This is what I'd like, not, oh, but I don't want you having to travel on a bank holiday. Excuse me, what was I doing at the time she said that? Traveling on a bank holiday to take her blooming well home. Hang on. I didn't say anything to her, but I felt like saying, mother.
Well, you're talking about you're capturing so many family dynamics in one short story here. One of the things that comes up for me as you're speaking is, how much do we allow ourselves to be shaped and formulated and conditioned and controlled by the ideas that we have of what other people want from us? This happens in every family. And, I can speak for myself. When I finally realized that was going on and I decided no more, I am going to be who I am, whether you like it or not. Well, guess what? They didn't like it. And consequently, I ended up in a situation where most of my family didn't really want to have anything to do with me because I was no longer living according to their expectations of me. Now, is that painful? Yeah, in a way it is painful. But on the other hand, it's kind of liberating. Now they know exactly where I stand. They have no question about it. And I'm now starting to see some of those. This, by the way, has been over 25 years. This has happened. I'm starting to see my brother kind of reaching out a little bit now, and not, it's not a big step, but it's a step. And this is what I think that all people have to understand. At some point, you have to decide what's more important. Are you going to be true to who you are, or are you going to allow yourself to be completely shaped by someone else's picture of you? That's the question you have to answer. So ultimately, even though we're talking about family, ultimately, it all boils down to me. It's all about me. I have to be truthful to myself. If I am not, then I'm going to be the one who suffers in the long run, no matter how happy those other people are. And that is just not right. I'm sorry. And I don't know if you folks have noticed this, but we seem to have gone way overboard in our society these days, where now if your feelings get hurt, I can be charged with a hate crime. And that is absolutely absurd. It is insanity taken to the extreme. I am not responsible for your feelings. Even if I call you a horrible name or something like that, that's me behaving. Your feelings are your reaction. That's just the way it is. And we have to grow up and start understanding that. I'm getting fed up with it personally. So I'm sorry, it was a bit of a rant. Dale, settle us down here.
Oh, wow. So many juicy nuggets here. I want to first speak to what you brought up, Sarah, about the assumptions. One of the big game changers for me personally in my family dynamics with family of origin and family that I've created, really is this simple concept of assumptions and agreements. And it's not something that I think, unless you're doing inner work, unless you're seeking this information out, it's not something that we learn typically in our family of origin, unless you've got really conscious people around you already. Such a game changer, and really shifts that dynamic of looking outside of yourself to be what you think other people want you to be, and really helping you to understand, wait a minute, this is who I actually am. And Sarah, I don't know if you've found this or David, if you found this to be true, but when you are actually being clear and asking for agreements and not making assumptions and taking people at face value, suddenly things can get, yes, some people don't like it, David, but it actually gets a lot easier for you as the individual. That you're not anticipating or trying to live up to something that you're not even sure what you're living up to, right? So I love that the discussion about hey, let's take a beat and maybe not make assumptions about what it is the other person wants. Let's just ask, what do you want? What do you need? And also, let's be honest and truthful about what we want and what we need. Like that in and of itself, I feel like is such a game. It's a simple concept. And it seems kind of obvious now, but it wasn't obvious to me until recently, but so powerful, such a powerful tool and practice to use in all your relationships.
Well, I think you hit on a very important point, and that's the concept of agreements and commitments. We make agreements with each other all the time. The problem is most of them are not written down. And so when I make an agreement with you, I have one understanding of that agreement and you have a different one. They may be the same, but sometimes they're not. And so consequently, if I fail to live up to the agreement that you have in your mind, but I'm quite in integrity with the agreement in my mind, then that's where some conflict can come in. This is why agreements are only worth the paper they're printed on, right? So you have to take the time. If you're serious about having a relationship with somebody, and this is true with your kids or with your parents or with brothers and sisters or with anybody, take the time to write down those agreements. I mean, these are important consequences, so that if something happens and Gail, let's say you tell me, David, you're out of integrity with respect to this agreement, we can go both look at it and say, well, what am I misunderstanding here? This is what it says, and I think I lived up to that. What's your understanding? Why are we having this argument? Do you see? When it's not written down, then it becomes just a he said, she said kind of thing, which is of no value to anybody. But I think that agreements are crucial in any relationship. And the problem is, most of us have either unwritten or, to kind of vary the word assume, we have implied agreements. You know, because you have behaved this way so much in the past, I assume you're going to continue behaving that way in the future. Wrong. We're all human beings, and we grow, we change, we transform, we go through all kinds of stuff. So to expect someone to behave exactly the same way just because they did so yesterday is kind of a mode of insanity, right?
And unfair.
And it's not fair. It doesn't allow the other person to grow. This is the same thing with any other kind of, with boundary setting, for example. In order to have a safe and worthwhile relationship with somebody, both parties have to be able to declare their boundaries at any given time. So I need to be able to say to you yes or no on any given issue. But just because I said yes now doesn't mean I mean yes 5 minutes from now. Or just because I said no now doesn't mean I'm no longer interested 5 minutes from now. You see what I'm saying? So we constantly have to be feeding each other with information. We have to be doing that constant loop. And it might be that my no is a permanent no. You know, on certain things, I'm sure that that's true for some people. You know, some people don't want to be sexually violated, period, end of discussion. But that doesn't mean that I don't enjoy having romantic encounters with people. Maybe not with you, at least not today. But you see, that's the sort of stuff that we all have to negotiate and play with throughout our lives. Those boundaries shift and change every single moment. It's kind of like, if you think about it, a boundary is really, in my mind, this is how I see it. You're on the beach, and the water comes washing up on the beach, and these waves are coming constantly. And every time that wave hits the beach, the beach itself, the shape shifts. It changes. Your boundaries are exactly the same way. All kinds of events are happening, so your thinking is changing, your feelings are changing, all of that stuff is changing. So you have to check in frequently and be able to say, this is my boundary right now.
Also, I feel like a key word in that.
Sorry.
I feel like a key word in that too is information, right? So it's especially tricky within our families to not take things personally.
Right.
Right. And when we're able, and I feel like we could have a whole separate discussion about that. When you're doing your inner work, when you're doing inner child work, when you're learning how to reparent yourself, I also believe that you can get to a point where you shift from that not that you never take anything personally, not that you never get angry or react to something. It's not about perfection, right? It's about progress. And you can get to a point where you start to detach a little bit from that taking it personally and recognize, this is information. I'm receiving information about this situation, about where this other person is, exactly like you said, David, like checking in, like, yeah, okay. I literally had something very similar happen with an in-law. Of There's a whole narrative about this particular person, and whatever, the stars aligned, and I met this person where they are at now. And it was a completely different experience, and all the past narrative just disintegrated. Right. And so it's exactly what you're saying. Like, it might be a no, or it might be I haven't changed, or it might be all of a sudden everything is we're all on the same page, kind of like your brother reaching out a little bit more now, right? Like, there is room. It's not to necessarily allow bad behavior or excuse bad behavior, or not be aware that that might come back around, but also we are totally capable of allowing space for people to show up differently in any given moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a point though. It's you mentioned the phrase bad behavior. I noticed my neck hairs started to stand up on that one, because
In
that's
quotation
just your
marks.
judgment. Yeah, it's
In
your
quotation
judgment.
marks.
Yeah, right. It's a judgment about someone else's behavior. Really, if we could learn to eliminate the words good, bad, worse and better, and instead replace them with, I would prefer if you would behave this way rather than that way. That's ultimately what we're saying, you know? And yes, it's true that certain kinds of bad behavior are universally accepted as bad, like murdering somebody, for example. But we also look at situations individually. We say, well, okay, yes, it's true that he murdered that person, but he was trying to defend himself or defend his child or this or that, or there were extenuating circumstances, and so he was kind of justified. So you see, even the worst behavior that we have, we find ways of justifying it in certain situations. This is I'm not trying to say that there's, any reason to kill anybody. I'm just saying that sometimes we can't just simply judge the behavior. Sometimes we have to look at the circumstances, and sometimes we have to consider the state of the mind of the individual who's doing it and all this kind of stuff. So let's be careful about making universal statements about good behavior or bad behavior or anything like that. I want for us to kind of model that sense of higher awareness. That's what I'm hoping for.
But isn't everything about higher awareness? For all of us.
Well, for us, it might be, but not necessarily for everybody else.
But it's about helping people. The reason we do these programs is to support and help people to know that they can do it as well.
Exactly.
We've come from a place maybe worse than they're in, but maybe it was easier for us. It doesn't really matter whether something's worse, easier, whatever, because it is what it is for each individual. Right. I'd like to sort of almost go back to this thing of my life is to revolve. My life is to revolve around me, as is everybody's within the family to revolve around them. It's their life, and they should be true to themselves. There are going to be times in families where an individual will say, okay, fine, maybe not necessarily my cup of tea, but this is my mother's 80th birthday, and she's older than that. But okay, for that, it's something she would really like to do, and therefore we'll honor the fact that it's her 80th birthday. So there are going to be those times when we do support people in things that they would like to do that aren't necessarily things we would like to do, providing it's not something totally against us and feels totally wrong. But it's also about, isn't it, being able to say no, and for people to realize that no can be a huge gift to them. And, the first time I really put my foot down and said no, I was not flavor of the month for a while. But what it ended up by doing was giving the rest of the family the freedom to do exactly the same. And it has to take one person that turns around and says, no, I've made an offer. It does not include whatever. And my offer is rescinded if that's what you want. And it was very much about not wanting a particular person in my house. The energies, I've got a house that's got some lovely energies in it. Why would I deliberately want to bring in somebody whose energies could disrupt that? So I said no. And it was just like, because it was something very specific. And that person to me was outside of the family. So I had the courage to say no. And as I said, it didn't go down well. But it has started that process. And with what's going on at the moment, it's about getting back into that process of honesty. And at the end of the day, your yeses and your nos should be totally honest. They really should. Honest to yourself and honest to others. And the other aspect to that is when you are saying yes to people and you really mean no, you're either going to let them down or you're going to do it really grudgingly and you're going to hold a grudge about it. You're also, there's the good chance that you're going to be worrying about it. You're creating a negative energy in yourself. And that negative energy is going to come out when
if you say yes when you mean no, you are 100% out of integrity with yourself.
Yeah.
Because, your thoughts, words, actions, and emotions are not in alignment. And this is something that people don't seem to understand. So if you cannot genuinely say yes, because you feel it in your body, then don't say yes. On the other hand, if you can't genuinely say no either, well, be honest about that too. Say something's going on for me. I can't seem to make a decision about that. Be honest. Give me some time to process it or whatever. You don't need an answer in this instant, do you? And most of the time people are quite flexible, So yeah, I think it's all about integrity. And integrity just means having all your thoughts, words, actions, and emotions all lined up, pointing in the same direction. And hopefully they're pointed in a direction that's consistent with who you are and what you're here to do.
Yeah, and the most important place, I sort of know you were sort of saying, Gail, about, okay, with the family and that's quite small, but don't they say, if you're looking for peace in this world, start with yourself. If you're looking for anything in this world, it starts with you. If you haven't got that within you, then you're definitely not going to find it outside of you. And so if we can bring a family dynamic into that place of peace, acceptance, understanding, etc., etc., if we can bring our family dynamic into that, where we accept who each individual is in their own unique being, because I am not a copy of my mother, not my sisters aren't, we're not a copy of each other, although there are times when we think, oh, that reminds me a bit too much of mum, sort of, because we've grown up with that individual. We are affected by what we have witnessed. And so there are going to be things that suddenly, as we get older, we think, oh, that's a bit too much like somebody from well, it doesn't matter who it is, because it could be a grandmother, it could be a grandfather, your father, sort of an aunt and uncle. It's just that somebody you've spent a long time with, witnessed a lot about, and it affects how and who we are. And it's all about stripping back all of that. And honesty, integrity, depending on the words you wish to use, because we all do use slightly different terminology for things. And that helps different people to understand what we're talking about. But it's the honesty to me, because if you're being honest, you're you're in integrity. And it's encouraging everybody else to, within the family, and you yourself with other people as well. It is really important that you accept the no's from other people in your family. The people who say, actually, no, I really don't want to do that. I don't want to be a part of that, whatever. We all have to accept that from each individual. And I know it's not easy at times. That's families.
Yeah, this idea, it all begins here. Yeah, you like to use the phrase, it begins with you. I prefer to use I statements. It all begins with me, and it is consequently all about me. In my relationships with other people, the way I show up is going to have an influence on them. But hopefully the way I show up empowers them and encourages them and inspires them to be more authentic to who they really are, rather than trying to please me or trying to please somebody else in the family. This is what I think we're trying to talk about here. We're each of us, I have to take responsibility for my own life, and I have to decide how I want the world to experience me. And if my family, for whatever reason, chooses not to experience me at all because I am not showing up the way they are used to seeing me show up, well, that's their problem. That's their issue. It is not mine, right? I have the same deal going on with my youngest son, who has chosen to behave in a certain way that doesn't appeal to me. And I have told him why I prefer not to be in relationship with him, because what he does, the way he shows up, it doesn't feel like it's in full integrity for me. And it's not what I would really want him to be, a fully integrous person who honors the truth of who he is, and who doesn't allow himself to be influenced by other people. That's my hope for him. And if he's not willing to do that, that's okay. I'll just stay over here and I'll love him from a distance. And some people say, God, you're a hard head, you're a hard nose, or a hard ass, as they say. And I said, well, maybe so. And I'm okay with that. It's a decision I've had to make in order to be true to myself. It looks from the outside like there's division between us. It looks from the outside like we hate each other, perhaps. I don't know what you think. And frankly, it's not important to me what you think. I only know that what's important to me is my relationship with my son. And it is taking the shape it's taken right now because of our differences of perspective. And that's okay. I'm sure that on one level or another, we're going to come together and we're going to see each other's perspectives in a new way. I'm looking forward to that day when it happens. But right now, this is where we are. And it's okay. I'm okay. That's the important thing.
I think that's what they call tough love, though. And that's a really hard thing, tough love.
Well, that's why it's called tough, because it's hard.
Yeah.
Anyway, Gail, I'm sorry. You've been sitting there with nodding and stuff. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Yeah. Oh gosh. I feel like it's so easy, talk about judgment. I thank you so much for sharing your experience and what's happening right now with your son. And I was really feeling you, when you started to say, oh, people think that it's, hard-headed or hard. And I kept hearing the word heartless, which I know is not true. And have been in the position where people have sort of questioned I know that's not true about you, right? I know you enough to know that that's not at all what's going on here. And being on the receiving end also of similar comments, of being coldly indifferent or brutally honest. And I get why it comes off that way sometimes to people who are outside of the situation. And you absolutely bring up a great point of when you are being true and in integrity with yourself, you can be okay with that discomfort. You can even be okay with whatever story people are saying about you.
Mhm.
And you can stand strong in that truth. It's not going to be easy. And that, in my opinion, that is actually love. And it's honest. And I suspect, David, that what you're hoping for will come to fruition. That eventually your son will see that,
Well, yeah,
and you'll be
I
able to
just
see
wanted
each
to,
other's perspectives.
right, right. Oh, I
But
just had a wonderful thought here, and it
oh,
just
go
went
ahead.
right out my brain. So never mind.
The other thing that I wanted to piggyback on is what Sarah was saying about no and the gift of no. And I'm so glad that you said, we also have to be okay with receiving no, because when you were sharing your story, for some people it's hard to deliver the no, and for some people it's hard to receive the no. And I was thinking about a particular time with a particular family member, where things kind of got a little complicated, and some truth was coming out and being expressed from my perspective, and I wanted to talk about it. That's how I am. Like, I got to talk about this. But that was my need, and I didn't maybe think it to be this way at the time because it stung, but they were being in integrity with me when they said no. It hurt.
Right.
It took me a long time to process it and to get over it. And I know in my heart of hearts that that person was being honest with me, that no, I'm not talking. Whether I can't or I won't, or I'm not talking about this with you. And I had to take it. As
Right.
much as I wanted to talk about it, I wanted, let's dive in, let's explore this, because that's me. And I had to honor that's not where this person in my life and in my family that I care very deeply about. And again, I'm in a similar place, David, where I'm like, I hope someday we can talk about that thing.
Right.
But we have to learn, even when it stings, and when we know that that person is being honest with us, we have to learn how to bring it back to ourselves. Everything that I was feeling was valid and legitimate, but I had to bring it back to myself and work through it for myself in order to honor my family member and their no and their boundary.
Right. Beautiful. There's something when you were talking about brutal honesty. I don't think honesty ever has to be brutal. I think that there's always a way to share truth from a place of love and compassion. There's always a way to do that if we take the time to find that within our hearts. However, I will also say that I would much prefer brutal honesty than the most soft, loving lie ever.
Mm.
I think that even the gentlest, most loving white lie is more harmful than any form of brutal honesty. That's my personal opinion. And so I'll just leave it at that. That's just my opinion, and I'm sure we could have a whole discussion about honesty and integrity and all these other and agreements. I mean, agreements is a great topic unto itself. So we have all these wonderful ideas coming out about things that happen in our relationships, and of course, we're talking about family relationships right now, not specifically about romantic relationships, although that is a whole nother kettle of fish. that we all have to deal with. But I think there's lots of great wisdom here. So I just want to thank you both for everything that you've been sharing so far.
Going back to your comment about brutal honesty, with some people, it's not a matter of what you say or even how you say it. As you have already said, David, it's what they hear, it's how they receive it. And so you could be trying to say something nice and gently, and it comes out to them as something really hard, nasty, brutal. You can come up with all the negative words you like,
Right.
because that is what they are hearing. You know, the stuff going on. My mother and my youngest sister absolutely know how to push each other's buttons. They really do, to the extent that now, even if one of them tries to say something nice to the other doesn't hear nice. It really doesn't hear nice. It doesn't hear caring. It hears, what it has got so used to hearing.
That's right. And that's what the ego mind does. It looks for the personal attack so that it can turn it around and attack back.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And it's how, and so we are in that struggle at the moment of, because my middle sister and myself have said on a number of occasions, oh, we'd love to bash their heads together, but it wouldn't help, but we've now got a situation where it has absolutely come to a head and exploded, and a break is required, but having said that, Saturday next week, so not this coming Saturday, the four of us will be all together to celebrate my birthday. So it's just one of those things that it's thinking about, okay, but I think there's going to be a sort of a rule. What's going on in the family is not for conversation. We can talk about politics, we can talk about religion, we can talk about the weather, but we cannot talk about what's going on in the family, unless we can have a sensible, without anybody feeling hurt and got at conversation. And we've got to be in that right place. Every member of that group has to be in the right place to have that conversation. So it's a really difficult thing, and that's only going to be about 4 weeks after the eruptions.
Well, what's interesting, Sarah, you said everybody's got to be, I think nobody can be hurt or something like that about, I'm not sure. Here's the thing. You must be prepared for the fact that somebody could be hurt no matter what is said.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's part of their reaction set. It's part of their receptivity and everything else, we've been talking about like brutal honesty. I don't know if you've ever seen the TV show. It was called Boston Legal, with James Spader playing the role of the main character, who is a lawyer by the name of Alan Shore. And he's just an incorrigible character. It's hard not to like him, but at the same time, he does some things that are absolutely despicable. But one thing I will say about him, when he tells you something, he's telling you the truth. And even if he says it in a way that is meant to be hurtful, he's saying it honestly and without any defense mechanism in line at all. And I'm thinking, wow, I don't know that I would want to be like him, but there are certain qualities that this character has that I find really admirable. And that is, he really loves people, and he tries to help the underdog in virtually everything. And he won't tolerate incompetence anywhere, and he tells people point blank how incompetent they are, which, that would be many people would say, well, you're just insulting the guy, you're using sarcasm or whatever. No, I'm just telling the truth. And so there's a way in which even somebody as incorrigible as Alan Shore can still have some really beautiful and loving qualities about him. And that's same thing is true for my son, for my family members. You know, even though there are certain qualities that I'm not really crazy about and I don't want to hang around with, there's lots of good stuff there too. And maybe if we could all learn to filter away all the bad stuff out of our minds and focus only on the good stuff, and I bet you there's more good than bad in almost all of these people. What could we do individually to heal our families, to heal ourselves? Just a thought.
It's really important to go back to that honesty. And something I have said now for years is, if you hear something and you think, ouch, don't ask, did you mean what you said? Because in 99.999% of cases, they're going to have meant exactly what they said, but that isn't necessarily what you heard. So the question is, did you mean what I heard? And I did do that with my mother. Actually, sort of the Sunday after everything sort of went up, and she said something, and I thought, wow, that's not nice. It wasn't actually about me, but that's beside the point. It was about somebody else, and it wasn't my youngest sister either. And I said to her, oh, can we stop there a second? I said, I can actually see two meanings for what you have just said. And so I said what the two meanings were. I said the nice meaning first, hoping that that was what she meant. And it wasn't. She had meant the way it had come across, which was not very nice. So, and I haven't repeated that to the person that was about, because I don't think it's called for. But t'other one does know about it, because, you know, it was really uncalled for. But also, I think, what is that individual going through? Because when this started, I actually went back to both my sisters and I said, I'm actually a bit worried. Is she depressed? Has she gone into depression? She lost her partner a year ago. And my dad sort of like 11 and a half years ago. She's not sleeping well. She's in pain. There's quite a lot of stuff going on. And so if you're not sleeping well, because of being in pain and lack of sleep are a great way of getting to the stage where you actually cannot cope with life. I know, I've been there. I had 6 months of pain and sleepless nights with my jaw, and I could not cope with life. But I was just exhausted. So is she in exhaustion? Is she heading towards depression? What is it? And so my middle sister actually ended up by calling her doctor, and then calling her and saying, I've spoken to your doctor. Will you please ring him? Because of so if there is some major disruption going on, what is going on in that individual's life? And can then we be in that place of not liking what's going on, but be in that place of, but is there a root cause? And is that root cause something very now rather than in the past? And pain and sleepless nights can do that to you. And so, yeah, my concern was depression. He came up with sort of various other things that it could be as well, that she could be. And so, but yeah, now she's getting some support. And that helps. And I think...
Well, I mean, what you're saying is, I think, really important. And that is, if I'm having a reaction to something that somebody else is doing, one of the ways that I can deal with that reaction is by asking myself, well, I wonder what's going on in that person's life that caused him or her to say that particular thing. This is called compassion. That's what that is. This is a really powerful tool that we can all use if we choose to practice it. Rather than going into our own reaction to what we hear, can we stay in our hearts, stay compassionate, and try to meet that person right where he or she is and say, so tell me more about that. What's really going on? Where is that coming from? That doesn't sound like something I would expect to hear from you. You know, you can say stuff like that, and you can encourage the person you're with to come from his or her heart at the same time. And often, well, the truth will come out sooner or later. It always does. Gail, you got something else to
Yeah.
say?
I hear two magic questions in what we're discussing right now. Your question, Sarah, of did you mean what I heard? I have been exploring with that, and it's so fascinating. It's so fascinating to have a reaction and have an assumption and to take a moment and say to the other person, did you mean what I heard? And then they say, well, what do you think that I said? And so far in my experience, that is not what they meant. So simple but potent, right? Really helps you get to the heart of the matter. And then David, what you're saying about compassion, again, another magic. You provided some languaging there, but also I used this particular question to help with one of the situations that I spoke about earlier. The question of what happened to you, or what is happening with you, and not in a judgy or accusatory way, right? Like not the what's wrong with you, but in the it's okay if you're willing to share, if you're open to sharing. I'd like to really understand this. I want to understand where you're coming from. And that just, if the person's ready, it just disarms them and opens them up. And there's so much healing that can come from that kind of question and conversation.
Right. And I think that there's something else here too, that if I can take responsibility for my reaction to whatever it is you say to me, then I can say something to you like, ooh, wow, I'm noticing some pain in my heart right now, and I just want to be with it for a moment before I say anything. I don't want to go into immediate reaction. I want to hold that energy, and because even if I say immediately, did you mean what I heard? I'm already putting it on the other person. Rather than saying, I'm having a reaction, what I heard you say was, and then just say, and how that landed on me was, and then you can describe that. And you can even go further and show your own level of self-awareness by saying, and it reminds me of when I was 5 years old and my mom did X, Y, or Z, and that same feeling came up in me. Now I'm sure you didn't mean for it to hit me that way. And I'm certainly not trying to put it on you as your responsibility. I'm just telling you my reaction. And I just want to leave it there. I don't even expect a response. If you can do that, believe me, you're going to create healing in your relationship with that other person. If, on the other hand, you go into immediate reaction saying, what the hell are you talking about? What's wrong with you? Well, guess what? Now you've started the war of the ego minds. Well, you maybe haven't started it, but you've certainly engaged it. I'll put it that way. And this is something that we all have to be aware of, right? The more we can take responsibility for our own situation, our own reactions, our own feelings, our own thoughts, our own judgments, the more we can do that, the more we can make it easier for other people to be in relationship with us. And that's ultimately what we're here to do, right? To facilitate relationship. So here we're getting close to the top of the hour, and I know Sarah's going to have to leave here momentarily. So I want to actually close out with everybody on camera today. So I'm going to start with you, Gail. Do you have some final words you'd like to share before we close out?
You can come back to me.
All right, Sarah, why don't you share? What final words do you have about all in the family?
Everybody in the family tends to love each other. They really do tend to love each other. There's love there. It may not feel like it at times, but we are all unique individuals. Be true to who you are. And as I was told by the psychotherapist I went to, and I said, oh, but my mother doesn't understand. She doesn't have to understand. She loves you anyway.
That's right. Yeah.
They don't. None of them have to understand how you are feeling. It is just a matter of accepting that is how you are feeling. They love you anyway. You know, the circumstances from my childhood were an accident. They were nobody's fault. So there's no blame. It's circumstances. And that's going to be the case in the majority of cases. It's about circumstances. It's not about lack of love.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you. Gail.
Yeah. Taking responsibility, taking full responsibility, right? I feel like we touched on it, but we didn't really go too deeply into it. And that's the piece that I want to leave off on, is when we're willing to take full responsibility of the things that we've been talking about today, our own reactions, our own feelings, our own interpretations of things. That's really when we can start to open the door to healing the ways that are familiar in our relating to our family. It's just familiar. It doesn't mean that we're bound to it being that way. And I feel like taking that full responsibility and learning how to be true and honest with yourself and then with others is really an important step to shifting things in the family in a way where some healing can come in, some growth and some evolution can come in to that family. Not everybody's going to be on board, and that is okay too.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, thank you both for being here again today, and thank you for watching this show, everyone who's doing that. Just remember, we are all family, even if we're not from the same birth mother. We all are family in a big, big way. We're all one. Let's learn to love each other in a deep and powerful way, and stand up, as Sarah said, for the truth and the wonder and the magnificence of who we really are. Remember, you can catch the recording of this and every other show on my website at yourlifemasterycoach.com. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Soul Empowerment. Bye-bye.
Bye.